Alright, we're going to get started. This is the MCAT prep session. If you're going to D18, that's in 2108 down the hall. This is Amanda Jones. She is class of 2022 at Hopkins, former UMD alum. And so we're going to kind of turn it over to Amanda and to our current UMD students.
All right, hi, welcome everyone. Just so I can kind of get a gauge of the room. How many of you guys are seniors? Good number. How many of you are juniors? Also, sophomores? 1 or 2. Freshmen? 1. Okay.
There are some post-bac students here too.
And some post-bac students. Post-bac students, welcome. Great to have you. All right, so my name is Amanda Jones. I graduated from University of Maryland in the class of 2017 as a biochemistry major. I'm now a medical student at JHUSOM Hopkins, and I'm here today to talk to you about how to prepare for the MCAT. So, kind of off the top of your head, if you were to say kind of the words that maybe come first to your mind when you think about preparing for the MCAT, what would you guys say?
Burnout.
Burnout? What else?
Expensive.
Expensive. Okay. Practice tests. Okay, so we're going to talk about a lot of those things today. We're going to talk about how to prepare for the MCAT, maybe not without, blowing the budget, without burning ourselves out, and practice tests. Unfortunately, not going to be able to get you out of that one. That's pretty important. All right. So we're going to talk about how to create an MCAT study plan, and the reason I use that phrase MCAT study plan is because it's going to be individualized and very different for each person, depending on kind of where you're coming from, what major you are. It may have kind of given you greater or less exposure to certain topics. For example, there might be some things where you're kind of like, I don't even really need to study this very much. And other things where you're like, I haven't taken this since high school. So it's going to be an individualized study plan to you. Preparing for the MCAT doesn't look the same for 2 different people. And that's also a little bit of a disclaimer for when some of your peers will be sharing also in a little bit about what it's like to study for the MCAT, is kind of just keeping in mind that it looks different for everybody. But so as far as kind of the action points for how you can create your own MCAT study plan, the 4 steps include understanding what it is that the test is going to cover, and then knowing what is your baseline, how much are you kind of coming in with as far as your familiarity, and then what are the areas that are weaker for you. And then we'll talk about what content review looks like, and then what practice looks like. Okay, so first of all, what does the test cover? So I'm pretty sure this is all correct unless any of course numbers here have changed since I graduated, but these are all of the courses that the topics here at the University of Maryland are covered on the MCAT. So that's going to be general biology, genetics and self-phys are both like, if you take those classes, you will know more than is required for the MCAT. If you don't take 222 or 330, then you may have to kind of give yourself a little, self-study some of that content that you wouldn't have learned in class. And then, hello. Hi there. This dog is And then there's general chemistry 1 and 2, organic chemistry 1 and 2, biochemistry 1. Sorry, I put 463, that should say 463. You can take 463 instead of 461 or 62. That's a typo. And then a year of physics, calculus 1, English 101. I mean, that you have to take here anyway. and then introductory psychology and introductory psychiatry, not psychiatry, sociology. So these are all things that you are kind of already pre-med prerequisites, so you will probably kind of already on your pre-med plan be planning to take all these classes before you graduate from college. The question is just where they fall in your overall 4-year plan and when you plan to take the MCAT. So a lot of people plan to take the MCAT. If you want to apply to medical school straight through from college, you generally have to take the MCAT by the end of your junior year, like at the latest. I think they say June of your, like right after junior year. So, and not everybody has taken all of these classes necessarily by the end of junior year. Some people might not be planning to take biochemistry until senior year, for example, or B-Psych 440, which is mammalian physiology, may not be on your plan until senior year. Or even it may not be on your plan until junior spring, but then you won't have finished taking that class and be ready to prepare for the MCAT maybe until that summer. And I'm pretty sure you guys have like other workshops that talk more about kind of the timing of your application and what taking a gap year is like. I personally took a gap year. I think some of the other panelists did too, or are planning to also. So if you take a gap year, it does give you an increased degree of flexibility in when you take the MCAT. I took the MCAT at the end of the summer between my junior and senior year, so August. And I studied over the course of that summer. And so that, like I said, gives you increased flexibility if you're not going to have all these courses done. But so that's one of the big things to keep in mind. I definitely did know people who prepared for the MCAT without having fully taken all these classes yet. Like maybe they weren't going to take those classes until after they took the MCAT. And that's possible, it's doable. I would say if you're already going to put in the effort, you're going to put in a lot of work, right, to take that class and get the credits here at Maryland. You may as well have that effort go toward your MCAT score. That was kind of my takeaway a little bit, and again, this is going to be kind of a personal decision, whether you want to take a gap year, what your timing will look like. But for me, it was worthwhile to really feel like I had maybe taken a little bit more content than was covered on the MCAT instead of up to the minimum or a little less, because it definitely gave me a lot more confidence as I went in on test day. So the question breakdown, we have 4 sections. Does anyone know the names of the 4 sections on the MCAT?
Biology.
That's one of them.
Chemistry and physics. Commerce, psych social.
Yeah, okay, so just in case anyone couldn't hear that, chemical and physical foundations of medicine is the first one, and then CARS, which is critical and analytical reading skills, and then biological and biochemical foundations of medicine, and then psychological and sociological foundations of medicine. So this is a little different from the old MCAT. I don't think anyone, this is no longer a crowd that the old MCAT is relevant to, but back when I was in college, there were definitely some people who had taken the old MCAT. There's a down emphasis or a de-emphasis on organic chemistry on the new MCAT, and an increased emphasis on biochemistry, sociology, and psychology. So that's good to keep in mind. So critical reading, that's your red section, that's a whole quarter of your score. Critical reading section. And then, again, psychology and sociology is a whole quarter of your score put together. So half of your MCAT score is going to be made up of those, like, softer skills, I guess you could say, but critical reading, psychology, and sociology. And then the other half of your MCAT score will be the harder sciences. So the chem, phys, and then the biochem. And this is something that I always really like to emphasize to people as they prepare for the MCAT, because it can be really easy to get caught up in putting a ton of hours into preparing, physics, general chemistry, biochemistry, and those are very important, but there's another whole half of your score that'll come out of these other things that are important to not neglect. So now that we've talked about what the test covers, next is to figure out what is your baseline. So like I said, this is definitely highly individualized. And the more you have a certain degree of familiarity with a given topic, the less time and financial investment you will need to put into your dedicated MCAT study. Again, this is like a personal decision based on if you would rather not take as many of these classes and would rather just kind of study on your own and put more time in, maybe buy more resources to study on your own. That's one way to do it. I kind of went the route of taking a lot of classes here that prepared me. A lot of the classes I took maybe prepared me more than was covered on the MCAT for that given class, and that left me feeling pretty confident. So I was a biochemistry major, so I didn't really need to study that much for the biochemistry on the MCAT. I was a Gen Chem 2 undergraduate TA, so I didn't really have to study that much for Gen Chem, things like that. If you kind of maybe take a level beyond what is the minimum that we talked about on the previous slide of those classes that are covered, if you maybe take one class beyond that, then that tends to make the MCAT studying process a lot easier. Things feel more familiar, you feel more confident, and like you have the material down. But that's definitely not necessarily feasible to fit into everyone's kind of like four-year plan. If you have a non-STEM major, for example, you may not have room to fit in those extra classes. But if you are, for example, biological sciences major, I would emphasize that I do think it kind of pays off, especially since if you're going to be taking that class anyway, it pays off to maybe wait until after you've taken that class to take it, in my experience. So next step, once you've kind of figured out once you've figured out what the MCAT covers and what level of familiarity you have with each of the topics is, the next step is deciding how you're going to complete your content review. So there are a lot of resources that provide content review for the MCAT. My personal favorite that I highly recommend is called Examkrackers. I used Examkrackers to study for the MCAT, and I felt like they did a phenomenal job for reasons that I can describe. But the Examkrackers 6-book set is, I don't remember off the top of my head. I guess you could look it up on Amazon, but definitely like not more than $200, probably $150 or $100 for the 6-book set would be my guess. So that's a pretty good value, especially because you can take MCAT preparatory classes that cost a lot of money, or instead you can buy these books for under $200. And then some of these other resources are similar. They'll have like a multi-book set that prepare you collectively for the whole test when you add all those books together. And they're also typically about that price range, like $150 to $200, I would say. So there's Next Step, Berkeley Review, Kaplan and Princeton Review are some of the other big MCAT test prep resources that you may hear about people using. And then UWorld. UWorld is actually a little bit more designed, or it's a resource that was originally designed for medical students, or as we prepare for our board exams, so USMLE's Step 1 and 2, but UWorld also has some MCAT resources. And then Khan Academy, which you guys probably are already familiar with, is an online free resource of videos that explain various concepts. So a lot of people that I knew would kind of pick one of these book sets to study, and then maybe supplement with like Khan Academy or UWorld for things that they felt like they needed a little bit of extra assistance with. And we'll talk about, so someone shouted out earlier when we asked, what do you think of when you think about preparing for the MCAT? Someone said burnout. So that's really important. Pacing yourself is really important when you study for the MCAT. I think one of the things that I was never told when I was preparing for the MCAT, but I think about now as a medical student, is I was never told, you know what, the MCAT is going to be the first of many like big standardized exams that you will have to take over the course of your medical training career. That was not really something that was ever said to me. It was kind of just like, oh, the MCAT is this big hurdle. Once you're over it, you're over it. It's kind of like, no, this is one of many. After this is Step 1, and then Step 2, and then you're in residency, licensure exams, and it's kind of just like an ever-continuing process of being a physician. And so I think one of the really, really important things, or beneficial things, that not everyone necessarily goes into their MCAT prep with the mindset of is, I am developing skills now that will help me know how to study, not just for this test, but for future tests that I'll have as a physician in training. So that's something good to keep in mind. I think you really want, it's kind of like, the idea of like crash dieting versus like actually having kind of like a lifestyle that you can sustain in terms of like your eating practices or whatever. And they'll obviously nutritionists will typically not recommend crash dieting because it's not something you can sustain for a long period of time. Similarly, studying for the MCAT is a type of work that you will have to sustain over a long period of time if you want to go into medicine. And as a result, I think it's important to learn how to pace yourself in and out rather than like crash dieting for the MCAT in a metaphorical way, if that makes sense. Don't overdo it. This is a point that I think is important also. So I think I'll just go out and say which one I'm thinking of. So Kathleen is one of the test prep companies that I think unfortunately doesn't do a great job at this last point. I would say that they fall in a category of prep books that overdo it in the sense that they include more information in their prep books than is actually covered on the exam. And if you are the type of person who prepares better by having, learned more than is covered, that's great. So Kathleen can definitely work well for some people. But I do think for a lot of people, it can be overwhelming to kind of be going through page after page after page of all this content, and it gets a little bit murkier and confusing which of these concepts is actually important to remember and which one isn't. There's a term called high yield that when you go to medical school you will find is used on an almost daily basis. Everyone talks about, oh, this information is high yield, this information is not high yield, for the sake of step 1, which is the test that my class is kind of gearing up to take right now. So similarly, high yield information is, I think, a good thing to keep in mind when preparing for the MCAT. It's better to kind of have a smaller base of knowledge that you are really, really strong and confident about than like this big, broad expanse of content that you've reviewed, but you have like a shakier grasp on all of it, if that makes sense. And that kind of just goes back to the concepts of general like test taking in general. But I think being a smart test taker, part of it involves if you look at a question, telling yourself, okay, I know what it takes to answer this question. Even if I'm looking at the question right now and I don't, the answer is immediately jumping out at me, I have technically learned everything I need to know to answer this question. Which is easier to do if you have that like slightly smaller frame of knowledge that you know more strongly. I think it's easier to get confident about that. And then people will theoretically have had the knowledge to work through a question, but maybe have missed it because they felt a lack of confidence and thought to themselves, oh, I must have just not reviewed this concept. So I think in general, just kind of like having a stronger, more confident grasp on the things that you have reviewed really pays off. And so lastly, we'll talk about practice. So something that I think can be people's maybe tendency during MCAT studying is to do content review, and leave off practice questions kind of to the end of your studying. And that makes sense. That may, be kind of how you prepare just for your regular class exams here in school, is mostly content review, and then maybe you do a practice exam, the day before your test. So that's kind of like how you're used to studying for class practice. For the MCAT, there is a large enough breadth of information covered that I think it's really important to not wait until the end to start practicing, and this is probably something you'll hear from a lot of people, telling you to do a lot of practice on the MCAT. One of the reasons I think practice is so important, I'm not just here to say practice, and without a justification for why. So I think one of the reasons practice is so important is it's like feedback, it's self-feedback on how well you've actually learned the things that you think you've learned. So if you've done a certain amount of content review and then you know, you kind of think to yourself, great, I'm good on acid-base chemistry now. And then, you know, maybe 4 weeks later you take your first practice test, and maybe there were some things in acid-base chemistry that you actually were kind of shaky on, or you hadn't done enough practice questions to really solidify. But now 4 weeks later you're taking a practice test, and you miss a bunch of acid-base questions. It's kind of like, well, is it because it's been 4 weeks since I reviewed it, or is it because I didn't learn it well the first time? And if you didn't learn it well, you know, fully, when you first kind of covered that content, I think it's really valuable to figure that out immediately. And, you know, you just did that chapter, you do some practice that makes you realize you don't have as firm a grasp on that concept as you thought you did, and then it's all like fresh in your mind that you've just reviewed to make sure you understand whatever it is that you missed. So I think a lot of people can shy away from doing MCAT practice until later on, because it can be a little demoralizing if there's like practice questions about things that you haven't covered, right? So it's like, oh, it's not going to be until the next week or 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now that I'm going to review that chapter. So I haven't reviewed this yet, so of course I got that question wrong. So that can kind of deter people maybe from doing extra practice, because it's just like, oh, I haven't learned this yet. Which is why I really like, in the prep books that I used, Examkrackers, they had a 30-minute practice test, like a 30-minute back of the book practice test that correlated with each chapter, and it was passage-based questions just like the actual MCAT. So that way you can do practice questions without, you know, having some of the questions be on concepts that you haven't done content review of yet. Instead it's like, no, you just did all that content review, and here are 3 passages worth of questions that all apply to that chapter. So that's, I think, one of the reasons that I felt like that was a really superior method. And I'm an MCAT tutor now, kind of part-time on the side, and that's kind of just been like also my general experience from seeing like what some of my students have used to prepare, is that is definitely strongest. Yeah.
I have a question. So if you do content review, let's say if you have a Kathleen book or whichever type of book, and it goes by topic, so let's say if you start with biology and you read a chapter on the GI tract, for example, are you suggesting that after reading per topic we should do questions, or is it like after reading the book itself we should then do questions?
I think after every chapter. And I mean, this kind of gets into like some of the minutia of how the different prep books work, but I know Kathleen, at least when I was preparing for the MCAT, which was 3 years ago, which I can't believe it's been that long, at least when I was preparing, Kathleen had like 12 chapters in every book, whereas Examkrackers has like 5 chapters in every book, so I think they have like longer chapters. Kathleen's shorter chapters. So maybe not like every single chapter if you're using a book that has more shorter chapters. Right, so I think in general, a good goal, if you're, and this 30 minutes a day kind of goal would be if you were preparing for the MCAT, like part-time, 20 to 30 hours a week. Then I would recommend doing at least 30 minutes of passage-based practice questions a day. So not just standalone multiple choice questions, but passage-based, because that's how the questions on the actual MCAT are. You read a passage and then you answer the questions. And if you're studying over the course of a semester and maybe like fewer hours per week, then you could adjust that accordingly. 30 minutes like every other day or something like that. And full-length practice exams are so important. The AAMC, who writes the MCAT, releases like 4 or 5 practice exams, and so those are really, really great, because it's literally, practice exams are written by the writer of the actual test. Those are going to be better than any other kind of third-party company practice tests that are written, because they're just, from the test writers themselves. So whatever you do, make sure you do every single AAMC practice test. If you have time for more practice tests, then you can, buy them from some of the other companies, and that's always a good use of time too, but at least make sure you do all of the AAMC resources. All right, so with all that being said, I think we're going to have a panel who's going to kind of come up now and start talking about how each of them prepared for the MCAT, and so you'll get to see a range of different experiences, maybe people who studied over a summer versus over a semester, etc. And then you'll get the chance to ask questions. But before we transition, does anyone have any questions for everything we've talked about so far?
So you said 30 minutes a day for like part-time studying. If you're doing it full-time, how long would you recommend it on passage of these classes college?
How many weeks are you going to be studying in?
Like 13 weeks?
30 minutes a day, so good. Yeah, probably. Okay.
So for like finding your baseline, do you recommend like taking a full like practice test to see where you are with the material, or how do you recommend that?
That is something you could do. It depends. So one of the kind of goals of this workshop today is to talk about how to study for the MCAT like on a budget. Practice tests do cost money. They cost probably like, what, $30, $35 per practice test. So I do think, if you're trying to keep your MCAT studying within a certain budget, there are free ways to figure out what your baseline is instead of using a $30, $35 practice test that you could save that practice test for after when you've actually been doing content review and would be able to use that to get a better sense of how you're doing. Yeah.
I don't know, when should you start doing like a full length test? Should it be like a month before you actually test, or like when should that process?
I generally like to say like a month into your studying. So unless you're only studying or a month into your studying, or at least a month out from your test, like whichever is sooner, I guess. So if you're studying for 3 months, start studying a month in. Yeah. Or start doing practice tests a month in.
And then doing the practice test, do you recommend like doing it in the test-taking conditions, like
Yes.
all like 8 hours, like all in one?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So the MCAT starts at 7:30 a.m., I believe, or at least it did on my test day. I think I actually started at 7. So make sure you are on, when you do each of your practice tests, probably like on a Saturday, waking up, starting the test by 8 a.m. Make sure you're timing yourself so that you're only giving yourself 90 minutes for each of the 4 sections. You get, you guys remember, like a 10 or 15 minute break between.
It's a 10-minute break and then
Yeah.
30-minute break.
You get a 10-minute break between the first and the second, and the third and the fourth, and you get a 30-minute lunch break between the second and the third. I made myself the same lunch, before each practice test, I made myself the same lunch to eat during that 30 minutes that I was going to plan to eat on test day. Just kind of like trying to simulate things as much as possible. Starting at that earlier time of the morning is all really valuable. And for me, I had probably an hour commute to my test, so I was leaving by 6 a.m. the morning of my test. So for me, I was kind of going to bed a lot earlier the night before my test than I normally would on a given night to get a full night's sleep. So I would recommend the week before your test, start going to bed an hour earlier each night, so you can actually fall asleep the night before your test. I think I was to bed at 9 the night before my test. And, it's hard to go to bed at 9 if you're not used to it. Yeah.
So, I have this MCAT schedule that's made for me, and in it, it's suggested to do content review first and then questions after. However, with being in school working on that stuff, I'm really behind with my content review. So should I just jump into start doing questions? Because according to the schedule, I should be done by December, and there's no way I will be done with 6 books by December.
Okay. Are you trying to take the test in January?
No,
April. Oh, okay. And you want to be finished content review by December?
yeah, according to the test I should be done.
So I would, especially given that this is already not seeming to be a sustainable pace for you, I would redo your study schedule. You don't need to, if you're taking the test in April, you don't need to finish content review in December. In fact, that's probably not good, because then it'll be 4 months old in your mind by the time you're taking the test, right? So I would stretch out your content review to go through mid-March and be doing all your practice questions concurrently.
My biggest question is, like, how did you make your schedule, or how would you advise us to make the schedule?
Yeah, so I think on the fall, some of the slides that we have next, each of us have, or some of us have our study schedules that we use included that we can go over and talk about how we did that. For me, I had kind of like restrictions in the sense that I was studying over the summer. So I just took the number of weeks that I had to study and worked myself backward. Like, I didn't start studying until after the spring semester ended of my junior year. I studied through like June and July for like 9 weeks. And I kind of worked myself back, like, okay, the last week I want to be only doing practice tests, you know, the week before that I can be finishing some content, and I created my schedule that way. And I was also working part-time in the summer.
How long from when finals ended in the spring to like when you started actually studying, like how long did you give yourself?
I gave myself a week off, I think, because I think I started like whatever the first Monday of June was or something like that. So I think I had the whole like Memorial Day week off to recover from junior spring finals week. And then I took the test August 4th. But I think there's also like a late August date that you can take this before the fall semester resumes. So if you want a few more weeks, if you want to study in the summer, you can have a few more weeks. All right, any more questions? In that case, we will all.
I remember like. We're probably just going to do questions at the end of all of us speaking, and that way we can go through all of our stories, and it'll be most, maybe might cover a question that you already have.
Can I just ask
You want to ask people?
one last question? I'm sorry. So you were talking about how like some resources you felt like covered too much material versus, so like you used Examkrackers, do you feel like that was like really well suited for the test, or?
I think, yeah, it was a really good balance of like all of the essential information. I also just liked, they had like pretty like pages with like color and like not all of the, I don't know, it was like easier to, so I personally used 2 Kaplan books in addition to the Examkrackers books. I bought 2 Kaplan books because I was like, I think I need more practice on this. So for example, I got the psychology and sociology Kaplan book because I hadn't taken psychology since AP Psych in high school. So I was like, I want extra psych review. So I did both the Kaplan book and the Examkrackers book. The Kaplan psych social book, I remember it was just like so hard to focus. It was like no color, you know, page after page. It felt like, not to like, I don't know, I'm sure their newer edition is better, but this was the edition that they had out at the time that I was studying. It kind of felt like they had taken a psychology textbook, taken out all the pictures and all the stories, and then just reprinted it and put it back on the shelf. And I was like, this is really hard to remain focused on, whereas the Examkrackers books like really kind of had things, concepts interconnected in a way that I found really helpful. Yeah. Cool.
Hi guys, I'm Darby. I'm a 5th year senior, and long story short, I'm on the soccer team, which is why I'm here for my 5th year. And I'm a double major in neurophysiology and biology, as well as kinesiology, and my GPA is a 3.897, and I don't throw that up there to like try to show it off. This is more so to let you guys know that this is my story of how I studied 4 months for an MCAT, and I blew it. So I'm notoriously a good student, but I didn't do well the first round. I took it twice. And so going through this, this is just my cost. Obviously the MCAT registration is $315, double that, gets a little expensive. AMC material, they're $35 a piece, section banks, question packs. I'll go through and show the total overall. The next set practice exams, which was probably the biggest amount that I paid for the preparation, which was $210 for 12. I actually didn't end up taking all 12, but for me I wanted to get as much studying with all the practice exams that I could. And then URoll, they have a 2-week free subscription, which is why I did it, and my friend actually ended up getting the subscription, and he took it right before his MCAT, so I ended up being able to leech off of him. It's pretty great. Find friends, you can leech off of them. Makes it a lot more cheap. And then Khan Academy is always free, and then Kaplan books I also got from friends as well, so they were free to me. Not saying they're free to everyone. So overall cost, exam registration was $630, the prep was $450, and the total cost was about $1,000. However, if I didn't take it twice, overall cost would have been around $765. And that's just me 2 days before my exam. Second time around. So what went wrong? 3 things I want to focus on is I was overworked, I was unprepared, and I wasn't confident. So overworked, I had way too many obligations. I at first wanted to try to take it in the middle of my semester last spring. I was still playing soccer, I had a job, I was trying to volunteer, and I was taking hard courses. Put that all together, it makes it kind of hard, and I kept putting my MCAT on the back burner, and next thing you know, I'm like, my exam's in 3 weeks. Wasn't very well prepared. So that goes into why I was unprepared. So I focused way too much on content review, and Amanda did a really good job of saying like content review is like, it's necessary and it's great, but it's not going to be your bread and butter. You have to have practice. And so even then, there's a lot of gaps and things I didn't know. She brought up the fact that for me, I hadn't even finished taking all of my classes that would prepare me for an MCAT. So I was still in physics 2, and I was still in biochemistry, which are 2 heavily tested courses on an MCAT. So I tried to self-teach myself both of those subjects. Didn't go very well. And so I took 3 practice exams before my first one. The first one of those was diagnostic, so I wouldn't even count that. So essentially I only took 2 practice tests. And I was okay with the scores I was getting, but I went into my exam not confident, knowing that I didn't have as much of the grasp of material that I would like to. And I started comparing myself to others, and the first time sitting down that exam, I had a question, very first question, was a physics 2, I remember it. Terrifying. Knew I didn't know how to solve it, and it just set me up for failure for the rest of that exam. And I couldn't get my mind focused, and I didn't practice enough, and so the second time around, I knew that I had to practice taking the exam and not actually just the content. So that was my score for the first one. Proud about it. You can see all the breakdown. That's what shows actually when you get your score as well. So you can see the Chem Phys, the CARS, the Bio, and the Social Psych as well. So moving on from that, my study plan, I gave myself 2 days after the last spring for me to start studying, because I knew I had to kick it into high gear for me to be able to apply for this cycle, because with that score I got, I wasn't going to be able to do it. And so I went through my Kaplan books, I outlined everything. I did CARS every morning, did 3 passages, and I paced myself for 9 minutes a passage, which is incredibly important for CARS because you have to get the pacing down. It's not just reading, understanding, it's a timing thing. Practice exams, I had Sunday Fun Day. Every single Sunday I took a full-length exam, and I made it as real life as possible. I dragged myself to a library, I put myself in a cubicle. It's terrible. And then when I started getting closer, I started taking two exams a week. So I personally overdid it on the exams, but I wanted to go in so confident for my second one that there was no way I was going to mess up. And so UWorld, she brought it up. It's actually my favorite resource that I use, because besides AMC, obviously, because they did such a good job of, you can tailor how you want to study it. They break down each section, and you can literally make a whole section, like a 60 question section, passages that replicate the MCAT on stuff that you might not know. So if I wanted to focus just on forces and like friction and stuff, like I could literally pull up like 30 questions and just put it just like that. And so these second time around as I was studying, these are my AMC scores I was getting, and so I have 519, a 513, and a 520. I think that was leading up 2 weeks before my second time taking it. And they like to say to average that exam, those scores that you're getting with AMC, to see kind of where you're falling as you get closer to your test date. Key takeaways, be careful with taking it during the semester. Stick with the study techniques that work for you. Don't go changing the way you study based off what we're telling you. So a lot of people use flashcards. That's not my thing. I'm a one-pager. I'm an outliner kind of person, so I'm not going to just go and start doing flashcards. AMC material is priority number 1. Take breaks and find time for fun. You don't want to burn out. I went hiking some days. I still played soccer. It's necessary. And be confident walking into the exam. There's always going to be a question that you don't know, and that's okay. That's what the exam's made for. It's made for you, not so much like do you know this content, is can you figure it out. And at the end of the day, your hard work will pay off. So that's my story, and I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Megan. I'm a senior. I'm a neurophys and psych double major. I took the MCAT on June 28th. I am taking a gap year, so I decided to take part of the summer to study. I didn't take the whole summer because I was like, oh, I want to have fun. I went to Peru. So I decided to take it at the end of June so I could still have 2 months of summer. But I generally did have a strong background in the material. This did change some of the amount of time I went in. I had already taken MAM-Phys, Biochem. I'm a psych major. I had taken a lot of psych classes. I had taken Soc 100. So it did change the amount I studied, as a lot of the content was review more than me learning it. So materials and costs, registering for the MCAT, I bought the Kathleen books and they came with 3 practice tests. I also bought the whole AAMC bundle, which was definitely the best thing I did, and I actually ended up using every single question, all the flashcards, and the guide. It was really nice. The guide has some nice things. You don't necessarily have to buy it, but it has nice things. Like, I wanted to know if it would be a fine tipped marker that the whiteboard would have, and things like that. So if you really want to know what the test day is going to be like, that's good. I also used Khan Academy for some physics things. Physics was one of our really big weak points, so I used it for that. And I also used a lot of my class notes. I found the Kaplan Biochem book to be confusing, but I found my notes from class to be much more helpful, so I used a lot of my Biochem notes and a lot of my MAM-Phys notes, since I had just taken MAM-Phys in the spring before I took my MCAT. So this is the original study plan I made. It was basically a breakdown of the date, the countdown in the number of days that I had till my MCAT, the week, what chapters I was going to do, what questions I was going to do, and there was a whole other tab for like what I was going to do, like what I actually did that day. I ended up using it for 2 weeks. I just like, it was like completely unsustainable for me. I like absolutely hated having to write it down. I hated writing down how many hours I did. Like, you know, like you see a lot of places I studied this many hours a week, that many hours a week. It would really get into my head if I didn't spend that much time doing it. So I kind of just had a general idea in my head of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to get done each week. I definitely had a lot of time built in for falling behind. I was studying a lot during the semester. I started studying in February, so I knew I would have busy weeks, like studying for MAM-Phys exams, having a lot going on with extracurriculars. So I knew I would fall behind, so I let myself be okay with that. I did still need to spend a little bit of time on material post-semester. Physics really was my enemy, so I did have to do like a physics boot camp. I spent 4 days like just entirely studying physics just to get it into my brain. But I did do 5 weeks of pretty much intense practice. I did as many tests as I could, like re-emphasizing, like I did it I woke up early, I sat down, I took the allotted breaks, and things like that, and which was really helpful. And using the AMC materials, so the section banks, the question banks, everything like that was really helping me get prepared. I did take all 3 Kaplan tests that came with my books. Be warned, the scores tend to come out pretty low, so don't really focus on the scores too much, and they aren't as representative as the AMC materials. The AMC materials are really what you want to focus on, but I use them more for like building up my endurance and making sure I could sit there for the whole time. So this actually did work for me, this spreadsheet I had. So I would basically take each test, I would look at each section breakdown, I would take notes. One time I didn't charge my computer and it died in the middle of a section, so that's basically why that whole section is there. That was pretty sad. And then I would go through each section. I would think about why I got that question wrong. So did I not know the material? Like, was I not thinking about it in the right way? Did I misread it? And then I would either write down the material I needed to learn from that question. With cars, there's not as much material, so I write myself notes like, don't overexpand. So it's basically like me giving myself taking the test advice, so I could go back and look at, here are the things I'm still missing, here's what I still need to work on. So this worked really well for me. This was the month leading up to my MCAT, so I did 7 practice tests in, I guess that's 4 weeks. So I did a practice test every single Wednesday and then some Saturdays. The last practice test I took was actually unscored. It was one of the tests they give you doesn't get scored because I didn't want to walk into the test with a score in my head. And then I took the MCAT for real on the 28th. So the key takeaways, what I wish I did, I do wish I had taken a practice test earlier. I wish I had known what the question types would be like so I could have focused that studying because like I said, like they've all said, the content is not everything. So I wish I had known more what the questions were like. Should have been a little more flexible with my schedule. Like I said, I built in time for breaks, but sometimes I'd be like so upset if I got behind. So like give yourself a break. Don't let your scores get too in your head, especially not the first one you take. The first one I took, I was so tired the whole time. Like by the time I got to Psych Soc, I just like submitted it. I was like, oh well, I'm so tired. So don't let those scores get in your head. I did not walk into the test, like, I would track and see where I was at, but I walked into that test like, I don't know what's gonna happen today, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. I ended up doing better than any of my practice tests, I think because I let go of that, and during the practice test, I would often think about, I wonder what the score will be on this practice test. So don't get in your head, don't focus on the scores too much. What I'm glad I did, all the AMC materials, lots of practice tests in full. Like, I really was prepared on that day for what it was going to be like, how I was going to feel, when I was going to get tired. I focused on the material that I was weakest in, and I focused on the high yield material. I would not go back and memorize every single little detail. I got to a point where I was like, I'm never going to know all this, and that's okay, as long as I know the higher yield material. And I practiced that weak material that was high yield every single day. So like reproduction, never got it. Every single morning I would wake up and look at the study sheet I had made for reproduction. Every single morning I'd wake up and look at the DNA sheet I had made. But it paid off in the end. That's a picture. My mom was sitting with me when I got my MCAT score, and she decided to take pictures. Risky move on her part. But it did turn out well, so I was happy in the end, and I was really excited. So that's a picture, so all the work pays off in the end. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Luke. I'm a senior. I'm majoring in psychology with a neuroscience minor. Okay, oh man, it's gonna get political, sorry. So I'm also in the current application cycle, and so many of the things I learned from my time studying have already been touched on, so I just want to expand on things that haven't been said already. So I spent about $700, just like Megan. I do think AMC is the best, but other things give you more content. So MCAT self-prep is something that has not been mentioned yet. If you're not going to take a course, which I didn't, I think that's a really good kind of like home base if you're looking to find some structure in your studying. Because as you can see up in the upper right-hand corner, they've got modules that have been basically constructed from free videos on YouTube, from Khan Academy, for example, into lessons to help you get more practice with things that you're not familiar with. They also allow you, that's all free. They do have some fee models where you can get like flashcards and other things from them too, so it's a great resource. I studied 4 months. Yeah, I took mine in April of this year. I think that was a pretty good timeline, but like everyone's been saying already, I think it really comes down to a fair diagnostic and then making a plan from there from your test date. Okay, so the 4 Ps. This is how I condense everything I learned. Preparation, we've already talked about. Problem solving is something that should not be overlooked. Like, you could review every single content book that's been written in prep for the MCAT, and you still might not get every problem right if you don't know how to problem solve with the passages. So use the tests as well as you can. Pace has already been touched on a little bit, but that's important in every section, like not just cards, the other sections as well. And endurance and perseverance come from that too, because you'll all realize when you take your first test that chem and physics come first, and that's maybe the most demoralizing section. You still have 3 more after that. Yeah? So you need to be able to keep your head on straight throughout the entire exam, regardless of how tough the questions are. So that's really important. Balance of this stuff we talked about already. Diagnostic is important. Yep, I've made my like little flow chart right there. So diagnostic, if you find yourself short on time, even if you did a lot for falling behind in your study schedule, then it's okay to start with some questions. And if you're getting them wrong, say, okay, I need to read this section of the book. I was going to skip it, but I actually don't understand this. A great example for me is reproduction, like Megan said. Like, I needed to come back to that a bunch. And I think that's something you'll learn on an individual basis, but that's why testing yourself is so important.
So hey everyone, my name is Maïgane Diop. I'm a current senior. My major is in cell biology and genetics, and I'm majoring in philosophy. I applied to MD PhD programs this cycle, super happy that I got an acceptance yesterday, so I'm going to be a physician. MCAT the day before Luke on Friday, April 5th, and I am a calendar aficionado, so like I put like the day of my MCAT on the other side. I was super excited for the real MCAT. So my study plan, I registered last October. I think today is the first day you guys can register for next year. So I intended to begin studying in January to have like all of January, February, and March to study for my early April exam, but I kind of like my character flaws being a procrastinator, so I didn't actually start until February, and I did about a month of content review, reading chapters here and there of the Kaplan books. I kind of like knew what I was not so great at, and I focused on those books a little bit more, and in the end, like, I found that reading was taking too much time and not really helping me a lot, so I really, from those books, ended up doing a lot of the end of chapter problems for almost every book, and that was really, like, how I used those textbooks. In March, I was like, okay, it's time to get serious. I started taking practice exams, so I took a total of 6, so 3 of the Kaplan full-length exams that came through the textbooks, or the books, and 3 of the AMC scaled full-length exams, and they now have 4 scaled exams and 1 sample exam that's not scaled, so there's more available to you now. I also used Khan Academy physics and psychology, sociology videos, which are free, available online. Those were extremely helpful to me. And I also went through Kaplan Psych Social Glossary, so you have like a textbook, and at the back of the book, but the book was really large, I didn't have time to read all of it, so I went through the glossary, and I made a document basically going through every single term in the glossary. And in my document I had, if there were words that I already knew, I didn't add them to my document. If I didn't know the words, I added them to my document, and like I highlighted words that I probably couldn't guess and didn't highlight the words that I could probably guess. Basically to be able to go through that document and like zero in on the things I didn't know and the things I would like probably get wrong if I came across them on the exam. The week before the exam, I was still like not really happy with my my physics scores, so I ended up buying the physics question pack from the AAMC, and I went through that. I had finished all of the coursework except for Biochem 2 and Physics 2. I was in those classes in the spring. So I didn't have to study too much of Biochem because I was feeling like I was getting a lot through the class, but I ended up doing a lot more with Physics review. So the total cost of my study materials was $256, and the total cost, including the registration fee, is $571. But again, if you're able to get like books from a friend or like also if you get the Kaplan books, you can get the exams for free, so that can also really decrease your cost a lot. And also, like if you want like a free diagnostic exam, Next Step offers 1 free exam. Again, they're usually pretty deflated, but it can always give you an idea of like where your strong suits are and what they like. So again, I took it during the semester, and it was like a really intense semester. So I told you guys I love calendars, and so I really had a hard time like finding time to study because I was working in a lab, I had an internship, I was taking classes. It was like a lot of stuff. So I had to like very closely schedule myself. I tried studying at night. I realized I wasn't getting anything from it, so I decided to wake up at 4:45 or 4:30 in the morning, wake up, study for about 2 hours, and then go about my day. And that actually like made it a lot better for me. I took all of my practice exams on Sundays, and I went through them throughout the week once I started taking exams. I went like Megan mentioned, I went through every single question, whether I got it right or wrong. Figured out like which answers I knew, which ones I didn't know, and the ones I didn't know, I would like use that time to go and research more about the answer choices, so that like every test I came with a greater knowledge of the content. So it was kind of like built-in content review because I was so short on time. And also like for religious reasons, I always took Saturdays off. I never did any studying on Saturdays. And I highly encourage you guys to like have a built-in break time for yourself, to do something you love, to hang out with people that you like, things like that, just to have a time that you can like look forward to basically, because it can get really intense, and again, you don't want to get burned out. So one thing that I did was like continue to be involved in music, and that also like was a great de-stressor. So this is kind of like an overlook of like, I took 6 practice exams. This is kind of like how they were laid out. So the lightning bolt in the bottom is where my test date was. So I kind of really started like being serious about it about 5.5 weeks before my exam, and then I took 3 on Sundays, 1 that week of like, one on a Monday, 1 the Thursday before my exam, and then 1 the Tuesday of my exam. I would space them out a little bit more maybe if you want, because here's the journey. So my first exam, it was a couple weeks in the studying content, and I was like, I should probably take a practice exam. And then I got a 502, and I was like, this is not going to cut it for a new PhD. So I was like, okay, gotta get serious now. I automatically saw here that my strengths somewhat were in cards and biochem, and like my weaknesses were in chem phys and psych soc. So I was like, okay, I'm going to focus most of my studying on those weaker sections, and as I get better at questions, I'll probably also get better at those other 2 sections. So my second, and again, Kaplan is deflated, so like, it's discouraging, but don't be discouraged about it. You can always do better once you know where you are. So the second exam, okay, like a week later, jumped up some points. Things are getting better, gonna keep moving forward. Then I took my first AAMC exam, and it was a little bit higher. I was like, okay, the trajectory is nice and up, okay, cool. Then I took the third Kaplan, and I was like, oh, this is not too great. But then I took, and again, like as you can see, the sections are pretty much like somewhat similar, where I was doing good in cars and biochem, like not so great on Chem Phys and Psych Soc. So I still knew that those were my weak points. And like when I looked at the Chem Phys questions, I knew that I had to focus more on physics because chemistry was fine. And so I took the like second AMC exam, and I got like a 517. I was like, okay, like we're getting closer to like where I want to be in for MD PhD. So that was like the Thursday, the week before my exam. And then I took an exam on Tuesday, and I walked into the college ready to take my exam, you know, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm not excited for it at all. And then it was just not a good mood. And I got a 510, and I was like, what is going on? You know, my test is on Friday. This is not good news. I was like, it was not a good, and that kind of, to me, was a testament of how much your mindset going into the exam is, like how much that really can affect how well you do. Because if you're taking the exam and the entire time you're thinking, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, I'm so tired of this, like you're probably not going to reach your full potential. But luckily, like I ended up doing much better on the actual exam than any of my practice exams. And like Darcy mentioned, for some people, like their AAMC score average is a good predictor of their exam, but for me, like my average was a lot lower than my actual exam. So even though like it can be a good predictor, if you're doing lower than like what you actually want to do, don't like take it too seriously. Just keep working on your weak points and walk in the test room with like confidence. You're going to get it done, and you're going to be so happy. Do something fun the weekend after your MCAT. Like for me, I got to go on like a trip to Katy National Park, and that's something that I've got to look forward to throughout the exam. So like just make sure your spirits are high, and like you're going to get through it. So my conclusions: be realistic with your timing. If you start early, do your content review to your heart's content, but if you're on a time crunch like I was, find your weaknesses as soon as possible and hone in on them and focus to try to get like your scores level and bring it up together. This was mentioned before, do lots of practice questions. For me personally, I done well in the classes that had to do with the MCAT content, so what was more important for me than understanding or memorizing content was really being able to understand the MCAT question formatting fast enough to be able to answer questions quickly. And that was really important, for example, in cars, where you just need to understand what they're asking and not make up things in your head, but just really be able to understand what they're asking and go through the questions as quickly as you can to have time to go over them if you like. The test is also very long, so multiple full-length exams really help you build that stamina. You will get tired after 7 hours of taking a test, so you want to make sure that you have the stamina that you need to keep focused all the way through the last section. And for me, like with Psych Soc, I realized I was getting tired, so when I realized my brain was kind of like going here and there, I would take a moment, just like close my eyes and breathe and get back at it, and that actually helped me a lot in focus in the last section. Don't lose hope. Like I said, practice exams aren't fully predicted, but use them to your advantage to push forward. And take breaks, do what you enjoy, what you love doing. And again, as I mentioned, avoiding burnout is extremely important.
All right, so you guys already heard from me. Thank you so much to everyone who's spoken. I wanted to just also show you guys my study schedule, since that was a question that was asked. We can go kind of quickly, but I studied biochemistry here. And this was my total MCAT prep cost. One thing I did want to highlight, because I think everyone else's slides included the $315 MCAT test registration. Note that if you qualify for the AAMC Fee Assistance Program, which you can ask Wendy more about, or the pre-med advising office more about, if you qualify for the Fee Assistance Program, that $315 drops down to $125. So that's a pretty good discount if that's your situation. And then I spent I think $100 on my Examkrackers 6-book study set. I got a couple of Kaplan books too, like I said. I got the Cars 101 Passages book, which is really good for just doing a lot of Cars practice every day. And then some AAMC materials, and I kept it under $600. Here was my study schedule, so I did it in 9 weeks. I didn't do it during the semester or anything. I kind of started that first full week of June, but I had already taken Biochem 1 and 2. I can't remember if I had taken it, but I had taken, Physics 1 and 2. I had taken everything that was covered on the MCAT. and then kind of just like did it in these 9 weeks while also working. I worked 2 to 3 days a week, but the days that I didn't work, I would start studying at like 8 a.m., not 4:30. That was incredibly impressive. I would start at like 8 a.m. And do like, I don't know, 8 to 5, 8 to 6, the days that I wasn't working. I think I had also like envisioned also studying the evenings of the days I was working after work, and then I found that I was just way too tired to do that. So it worked better for me to just have like entire days that I could wake up refreshed and spend the whole day doing content / practice, and then, you know, have other whole days that I was just, I don't know, it works a little bit better for me to compartmentalize my life that way. But so like when it says what chapters I was doing what weeks, that would be like reading through the chapter, and then at least for Examkrackers, they would have like a decent number of multiple choice questions built into the chapter, like 24, I think, multiple choice questions built into the chapter, and then a full like 30-minute back of the book test that would go with each chapter, and then like do more practice questions, review, and then, you know, I would like review for what I got wrong, why did I get it wrong, you know, like the answer explanations, things like that. So that was kind of how I filled my time. I did 4 Kaplan practice tests. Back then they only had 1 AMC practice exam, and then a sample exam that was unscored, so now they have like 5 instead of the 2 that I did. What everyone said about how the Kaplan scores are deflated is definitely true. My Kaplan, I think practice tests averaged more like a 512, and then my AAMC practice was a 521, which was the only AMC practice that they had. And yeah, and definitely I echo everything everyone else said. Do something fun the weekend after your MCAT. For me, that was wedding venue hunting. That was really fun. But anyway, yeah. Do you guys have questions?
When you guys like were content reviewing, I guess, did you guys kind of just do like one subject at a time, or did you like switch around between them and then like go back and stuff like that?
So I did like all of the subjects. I kind of planned it out to be doing them simultaneously. Not everyone does, and that way some people do just like 2 books at a time and they finish them, they do 2 new books at a time and finish them. But I kind of liked focusing on everything a little bit at a time.
So I'm currently in the process of kind of deciding what practice exams I might want to purchase. I know a lot of you did Kaplan, but I just wanted to know if you had any other idea of maybe what practice exams might be best to get.